It's my journey, it's your journey. You need my help and I need yours. 'Cause we are...
Welcome to Journeys of Faith. Welcome to Journeys of Faith, founded by Bob and Penny Lord, Brother Joseph Fry Aldenhoven at your service, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, Apostle of the Sacred Heart, and her enduring message. In the quiet cloisters of most of 17th century France, a humble Visitation nun named Margaret Mary Alacoque received a divine call that would ripple through the centuries, shaping Catholic devotion in ways she could scarcely have imagined. Her visions of Jesus Christ revealing his sacred heart burning with love for humanity weren't just personal revelations, they were a mission, a challenge to the church and to every believer to embrace a deeper, more intimate connection with God. At Journeys of Faith, we've long been captivated by the stories of saints like Margaret Mary, whose lives serve as both inspiration and roadmap for our own spiritual quests. Founded in 1980 by Bob and Penny Lord, our ministry has dedicated itself to uncovering the miracles, shrines, and saints that define our Catholic heritage, bringing their transformative power into your life through books, media, and pilgrimages. Margaret Mary's story isn't just a historical footnote, it's a living testament to the power of faith in the face of doubt, suffering, and even rejection. Born in 1647 in a small Burgundian village, she faced illness, loss, and skepticism from her own religious community, yet her unwavering trust in Christ's message of love and mercy birthed a devotion that continues to inspire millions. Her Sacred Heart revelations, urging reparation for sin, frequent communion, and a life of prayer, cut to the core of what it means to be Catholic even today. As we dive into her life and legacy, we invite you to reflect on your own journey. How can the burning love of the Sacred Heart ignite your faith? Through the lens of Journeys of Faith, we'll explore not just who Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque was, but what her enduring message means for us now in a world hungry for spiritual depth and connection. Early life and childhood grace. In the rolling hills of 17th century France, in the small village of Lautecourt, a young Margaret Mary Alacoque entered the world on July 22, 1647. Born into a family of modest means, her early years were marked by a quiet, unassuming grace that belied the extraordinary path ahead. Her father, Claude, a notary, and her mother, Philibert, instilled in her a deep Catholic faith, but it wasn't just their teachings that shaped her. It was the raw, almost tangible presence of the divine that seemed to hover over her cradle, a presence she'd later describe as a call from the Sacred Heart itself. Margaret's childhood wasn't a gilded one. By age 8, she'd already tasted the bitterness of loss when her father passed away, leaving the family in financial straits. Sent to a convent school run by the Poor Clares, she found herself in an environment of strict discipline and fervent prayer. But even there, amid the cold stone walls and whispered devotions, something extraordinary was stirring. Margaret began to experience mystical encounters, visions she'd later recount of Christ himself. These weren't mere daydreams of a lonely child. They were vivid, piercing moments that left her trembling with a mix of awe and unworthiness. She felt chosen, though she couldn't yet grasp why. Illness struck early, too, a rheumatic fever that confined her to bed for years, stripping away the carefree play of youth. Yet in that forced stillness, Margaret turned inward, her heart becoming a silent chapel where she met her Lord. She made a private vow of virginity at just 4 years old, a decision that seemed absurdly precocious to those around her, but was to her as natural as breathing. Pain and isolation didn't break her, they forged her. By the time she recovered, her soul was already tethered to a mission she couldn't yet name, a mission rooted in the boundless love of Christ's Sacred Heart that had begun to whisper to her in the quiet of her suffering. Call to action: journey deeper with Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque. Hey there, fellow seekers of faith. Let's take this inspiration from Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque and turn it into action. At Journeys of Faith, we're all about guiding you closer to the Sacred Heart through authentic Catholic resources and experiences. Her message of devotion isn't just history, it's a living call to transform your spiritual life. Ready to dive deeper? Here's how you can walk this path with us. Explore our resources, grab a copy of our best selling books, or stream our EWTN episodes to uncover more about the Sacred Heart devotion and the saints who've shaped our faith. Join a pilgrimage. Experience the holy sites tied to Saint Margaret Mary firsthand. Our international pilgrimages bring her story and the power of the Eucharist to life. Visit Holy Family Mission. Retreat to our Spiritual Formation Center in Morrilton, Arkansas for reflection and renewal inspired by her enduring message. Connect with community. Engage with fellow Catholics through our faith based events and media, building a shared journey of devotion. Start your journey today at Journeys of Faith. Let's honor St. Margaret Mary's legacy together. Her heart calls us still. Entrance into the Visitation Monastery. In 1671, at the age of 24, Margaret Mary Alacoque took a decisive step on her spiritual odyssey, entering the Visitation Monastery in Paray-le-Monial, France. This wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a hard pivot into a life of discipline, prayer, and surrender. Picture it, a young woman already battered by personal loss and societal pressure, stepping through the heavy doors of a cloistered world, leaving behind any semblance of earthly ambition. She she wasn't chasing comfort. She was chasing Christ. The Visitation Order, founded by Saint Francis de Sales and Saint Jane de Chantal, emphasized humility and gentleness, a fitting crucible for Margaret Mary's burgeoning devotion to the Sacred Heart. But let's not romanticize this too much. The early days weren't all divine light and heavenly choirs. Monastery life was grueling. Think endless hours of prayer, manual labor, and strict silence, all while wrestling with internal doubts and the weight of her own perceived unworthiness. Margaret Mary faced scrutiny from her fellow sisters who didn't immediately grasp the depth of her spiritual intensity. Some saw her as overly pious, even eccentric, especially as she began to experience mystical visions that would later define her legacy. Yet it was in this pressure cooker of sacrifice and solitude that her soul was forged. She embraced the rule of the Visitation with a ferocity that bordered on obsession, determined to strip away every ounce of self to make room for God's will. Her entrance into the monastery wasn't just a personal milestone, it was the launch pad for a mission that would ripple through the Catholic world. Paray-le-Monial became the unlikely epicenter of a devotion that would challenge the cold rationalism of the era. Here, amid the quiet stone walls and whispered prayers, Margaret Mary began to receive the revelations of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, messages of love, reparation, and mercy that she would carry, often at great personal cost, to a church in desperate need of warmth. Mystical visions of the Sacred Heart. Let's dive into the heart of Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque's story, quite literally. Between 1673 and 1675, this humble Visitation nun in Paray-le-Monial, France, experienced a series of profound mystical visions that would reshape Catholic devotion for centuries. These weren't just fleeting dreams or vague spiritual hunches, they were visceral, direct encounters with Christ Himself, who revealed His Sacred Heart as a symbol of divine love and mercy. Imagine the weight of that, being chosen to carry a message so raw and urgent that it would challenge the spiritual complacency of an entire era. In her own writings, Margaret Mary described how Jesus appeared to her, his heart exposed and burning with flames, encircled by a crown of thorns and pierced by a wound. He spoke with piercing clarity. He longed for humanity to return his love, to honor his heart through devotion, and to make reparation for the indifference and sin that wounded him. One of the most striking visions came on the feast of St. John the Evangelist in 1673, when Christ invited her to rest her head upon his heart, just as John had at the Last Supper. This wasn't just symbolism, it was an intimate call to communion, a plea for souls to draw close to him. These revelations weren't without struggle. Margaret Mary faced skepticism even from within her own convent. Who could blame them? A young nun claiming direct messages from Christ in an age of religious tension and Jansenist rigidity was a hard pill to swallow. Yet the intensity of her experiences, often accompanied by physical pain and spiritual ecstasy, couldn't be dismissed. Christ gave her specific instructions: establish a feast in honor of the Sacred Heart on the Friday after the octave of Corpus Christi, promote the practice of the First Friday's devotion, and encourage a holy hour of reparation. These weren't suggestions, they were missions etched into her soul. What's remarkable is how these visions cut through the noise of 17th century France, a time when faith was often reduced to cold formalism or divisive debate. The Sacred Heart devotion through Margaret Mary's obedience became a countercultural cry, a reminder that God's love isn't abstract or distant, but a living, bleeding reality aching for connection. Her encounters with Christ weren't just personal, they were a lifeline thrown to a world drowning in spiritual apathy, a call to wake up and feel the pulse of divine compassion. The 12 promises revealed to her in the quiet of the Visitation convent in Paray-le-Monial, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque received a series of divine revelations that would echo through centuries, shaping Catholic devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Among the most profound gifts bestowed during these mystical encounters were the 12 promises, a set of assurances from Christ himself, meant for those who would honor his Sacred Heart with true devotion. These promises, revealed between 1673 and 1675, are not mere words but a covenant, a spiritual lifeline for the faithful, offering hope, healing, and a path to deeper communion with God. Let's unpack these promises, each one a gem of divine intent delivered to a humble nun whose heart burned with love for her Savior. First, Christ promised that he would grant all necessary graces for their state alive to those who venerate his Sacred Heart. Imagine that, a tailor-made outpouring of grace, whether you're a parent, a worker, or a seeker grappling with life's uncertainties. The second promise offers peace in families, a balm for fractured homes, while the third assures consolation in all troubles. These aren't abstract platitudes, they're a direct line to Christ's own heart, pierced for our sake. The promises grow even more intimate. The fourth speaks of a secure refuge during life and especially at the hour of death. Think of it as a spiritual fortress unassailable by fear or despair. The fifth guarantees abundant blessings on all undertakings, while the sixth is a stark reminder of transformation. Sinners will find in the Sacred Heart an infinite ocean of mercy. It's a call to return, no matter how far one has strayed. The seventh and eighth promises turn to the lukewarm and the fervent, respectively, offering a rekindling of faith for the former and a path to perfection for the latter. Here, Christ meets us wherever we are on our journey, nudging us forward. Then there are the promises of impact. The ninth assures that those who promote this devotion will have their names written in Christ's heart, never to be effaced, a permanent inscription in divine memory. The 10th, often called the Great Promise, is staggering. Those who receive communion on the first Fridays for 9 consecutive months will be granted the grace of final perseverance, a safeguard against dying without the sacraments. It's a commitment, yes, but one with an eternal payoff. The 11th extends blessings to homes where the image of the Sacred Heart is honored, turning ordinary spaces into sanctuaries. Finally, the 12th promise elevates priests, giving them the power to touch even the hardest hearts through this devotion, a tool for shepherds to reclaim lost sheep. These 12 promises aren't just a list, they're a living dialogue between Christ and humanity, mediated through Saint Margaret Mary. They challenge us to trust, to act, to surrender. They remind us that devotion to the Sacred Heart isn't a passive ritual, but a radical act of love, one that promises to reshape our lives, our families, and our very souls. Spiritual trials and opposition. In the quiet cloister of the Visitation convent in Paray-le-Monial, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque faced a crucible of spiritual and earthly challenges that would test the very core of her devotion. Her visions of the Sacred Heart, those intimate encounters with Christ where he revealed his burning love and sorrow for humanity's indifference, were not met with open arms by all. Instead, they ignited a storm of skepticism and outright hostility from those around her, both within the convent walls and beyond. Imagine the weight of it. A young nun, barely in her 20s, claiming divine revelations in an era when such assertions could brand you a heretic or a madwoman. Her fellow sisters, steeped in the rigid structures of religious life, often dismissed her experiences as delusions or, worse, dangerous distractions from the order's discipline. Superiors questioned her sanity, subjecting her to intense scrutiny and even humiliation. Theologians and clergy, those gatekeepers of doctrine, were quick to challenge the authenticity of her messages, fearing they might stray from established teaching or incite fervor they couldn't control. This wasn't just doubt, it was a gauntlet of opposition that could have broken a lesser spirit. Yet Margaret Mary's trials weren't merely external. Internally, she wrestled with profound spiritual desolation, those dark nights of the soul where God's presence seemed to vanish, leaving her in a void of doubt and fear. She endured physical ailments too, constant illness and weakness that sapped her strength as if her body mirrored the torment of her mission. These weren't abstract struggles, they were raw, visceral, the kind of pain that makes you question whether you've misunderstood God's call entirely. But here's the thing about Margaret Mary, she didn't buckle. Each rejection, each moment of isolation became a forge for her resolve. She leaned into her suffering, seeing it as a share in Christ's own passion, a way to unite herself more deeply to the Sacred Heart she so loved. Her persistence wasn't born of stubbornness, but of an unshakable trust in the divine mandate she'd received to spread devotion to the heart of Jesus no matter the cost. Through every trial, she clung to prayer and obedience, submitting to her superiors even when they opposed her, trusting that God would vindicate his message in time. And he did, though not without a fight that would define her sanctity. Alliance with Saint Claude de la Colombière. In the quiet, often tumultuous landscape of 17th century France, where faith and skepticism clashed like swords in a duel, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque found an unexpected ally in Saint Claude de la Colombière. This wasn't just a chance meeting of two pious souls, it was a divine collision, a partnership forged in the fires of spiritual mission that would amplify the message of the Sacred Heart of Jesus to a world desperate for its warmth. Claude, a Jesuit priest with a razor sharp intellect and a heart attuned to God's whispers, arrived at the Visitation convent in Paray-le-Monial in 1675 as Margaret Mary's confessor. At the time, Margaret Mary was grappling with the weight of her visions, revelations of Christ's Sacred Heart that demanded devotion, reparation, and a radical trust in divine love. These weren't gentle daydreams, they were soul shaking encounters that left her both exhilarated and isolated, often doubted by her own community. Enter Claude, a man whose own spiritual journey had primed him to recognize the authenticity of her experiences. He didn't just listen, he believed. And in that belief, he became the anchor she needed to navigate the storm of skepticism. Their alliance was a masterclass in mutual reinforcement. Claude brought theological grounding and a public voice to Margaret Mary's private revelations. He saw in her visions not just personal piety, but a universal call, a mission to spread devotion to the Sacred Heart as a remedy for a cold, sin-weary world. Margaret Mary, in turn, gave Claude a cause that ignited his own fervor, a tangible way to channel his Jesuit commitment to God's greater glory. Together, they were unstoppable, a duo that turned personal struggle into a movement. Claude's writings and preaching began to echo the messages of the Sacred Heart, while Margaret Mary's steadfast witness provided the raw, unfiltered truth of divine encounter. This partnership wasn't without its battles. The church, ever cautious of mystical claims, cast a wary eye on their work. Yet Claude's credibility as a Jesuit and his unwavering support of Margaret Mary helped shield her from outright dismissal. He stood as her defender, her interpreter, translating the raw emotion of her visions into a language the faithful could embrace. Theirs was a collaboration that reminds us of the power of unity in faith, how two souls, aligned in purpose, can become a beacon for countless others seeking the light of Christ's love, spreading devotion to the Sacred Heart. Let's dive into the heart of Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque's mission, pun very much intended. This wasn't just a personal spiritual awakening for a cloistered nun in 17th century France. It was a divine mandate to ignite a fire of devotion across the Catholic world. Margaret Mary, through her visions of Jesus Christ, received a clear directive: spread the love and mercy of his Sacred Heart. And let me tell you, she didn't just whisper it in the convent halls of Paray-le-Monial. She became a relentless apostle, even when the odds and the skeptics were stacked against her. Picture this: a young woman, frail from years of illness and personal sacrifice, stepping into a world that wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for mystic visions. Yet between 1673 and 1675, Margaret Mary experienced a series of revelations where Christ himself revealed his heart, burning with love, pierced by thorns, aching for humanity's return. He tasked her with promoting devotion to his Sacred Heart, promising immense graces for those who honored it through prayer, reparation, and the now iconic practice of the First Fridays. But here's the kicker: she faced pushback. Her own community doubted her. Church authorities raised eyebrows. It's the kind of underdog story that makes you root for her harder. Margaret Mary didn't back down. With the support of her confessor, Saint Claude de la Colombière, she began to document and share these messages. Claude, a Jesuit with a sharp mind and unshakable faith, became her ally in this spiritual campaign, helping to validate her experiences and preach the devotion far beyond the convent walls. Together, they laid the groundwork for what would become a cornerstone of Catholic spirituality. They, pushed for the establishment of a feast day now celebrated as the Solemnity of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, and encouraged practices like holy hours and consecration to the Sacred Heart. What's striking here is the sheer grit of it all. This wasn't a viral social media movement with instant likes and shares. This was a slow burn, fueled by faith and persistence in an era where a woman's voice in religious matters was often dismissed. Margaret Mary's devotion wasn't just about personal piety, it was a call to action for the church to remember Christ's boundless love, especially in a time of Jansenist rigidity that emphasized God's judgment over his mercy. Her message cut through that noise like a beacon, reminding the faithful that God's heart isn't distant, it's wounded for us, yearning for connection. And so, through letters, conversations, and the quiet power of her example, she planted seeds that would grow long after her lifetime. The devotion to the Sacred Heart became a lifeline for countless souls, a reminder of Christ's humanity and divinity intertwined, pulsing with love for every one of us. From private revelation to public feast, let's dive into the seismic shift that Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque ignited, a shift so profound it reshaped Catholic devotion on a global scale. Picture this: a humble Visitation nun in 17th century France, cloistered in the quiet of Paray-le-Monial, receiving visions of Christ himself. Between 1673 and 1675, Margaret Mary wasn't just praying, she was being handed a divine mandate straight from the Sacred Heart. Jesus didn't mince words, revealing his heart burning with love for humanity, pierced by our indifference, and pleading for reparation through devotion. This wasn't a quiet personal nudge, it was a call to action, a mission to spread this fiery love to a world grown cold. Now, here's where the story gets gritty. Private revelations like Margaret Mary's don't just automatically become church doctrine, they're put through the ringer. Her visions face skepticism from her own religious community and beyond. Superiors doubted her sanity, peers whispered about delusions, and yet, with the steadfast support of her confessor, Saint Claude de la Colombière, she pressed on. Claude, a Jesuit with a sharp theological mind, saw the authenticity in her experiences and became her champion, helping to document and defend these divine encounters. Together, they laid the groundwork for something monumental. Fast forward to the aftermath of her death in 1690. The devotion to the Sacred Heart didn't fade into obscurity, it exploded. What started as whispered prayers in a French convent became a tidal wave thanks to the tireless efforts of those inspired by her message. By 1765, the Feast of the Sacred Heart was officially recognized in France, and in 1856, Pope Pius IX extended it to the Universal Church. Think about that. A private revelation born in the heart of one obscure nun became a public feast celebrated by millions. Margaret Mary's insistence on practices like the First Fridays, 9 consecutive Fridays of communion and reparation for sins against the Sacred Heart, gave everyday Catholics a tangible way to live out this devotion, and the image of the Sacred Heart with its flames and thorns became an icon of divine love and mercy, plastered in homes and churches worldwide. And this wasn't just a feel good story, it was a revolution in spirituality. Margaret Mary's revelations reframed how Catholics understood God's love not as distant or judgmental, but as a heart aching for connection. It's a message that cut through the noise of her era's rigid formalism and still cuts through ours. Her life proves that even the quietest voices, when aligned with divine purpose, can echo through centuries. By miracles and heavenly favors attributed to her. Let's dive into the awe inspiring accounts that surround Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, a figure whose life was steeped in the mystical and the miraculous. Her story isn't just a dusty page in a hagiography, it's a living testament to the power of faith, a narrative that pulses with divine intervention and heavenly favor. Through her unwavering devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Margaret Mary became a conduit for miracles that continue to stir the hearts of the faithful centuries later. One of the most profound aspects of her legacy is the sheer number of reported healings and spiritual transformations tied to her intercession. During her lifetime, those who sought her prayers often found themselves touched by inexplicable recoveries. A fellow nun, plagued by a debilitating illness, was said to have been restored to health after Margaret Mary prayed over her with fervent devotion to the Sacred Heart. This wasn't a one off event. Stories like these pepper the historical record, painting a picture of a woman whose connection to Christ seemed to defy the natural order. But the miracles didn't stop with her passing in 1690. If anything, they multiplied. Pilgrims flocking to her tomb in Paray-le-Monial reported extraordinary graces, physical healings, yes, but also profound conversions of heart. A hardened skeptic, after visiting her resting place, found himself weeping at the altar, overcome by a sudden and unshakable belief in God's love. These accounts, passed down through generations, aren't just folklore. They were meticulously documented by the Church during her canonization process, a rigorous vetting that sifts fact from fervor. Perhaps the greatest miracle of Margaret Mary's influence is the enduring devotion to the Sacred Heart itself. Through her visions, she relayed Christ's desire for humanity to honor his heart as a symbol of infinite love and mercy, a message that sparked a global movement. The First Friday devotions, the Holy Hour, and the Feast of the Sacred Heart all trace their roots to her revelations. These practices have touched millions, offering a tangible way to connect with divine compassion. Isn't that a miracle in itself? A single, humble nun's obedience to a heavenly call reshaped Catholic spirituality, lighting a fire that still burns bright. And then there's the quieter, personal side of her intercession, those small, intimate favors that don't make the history books but resonate deeply with the faithful. Countless devotees whisper of answered prayers, of feeling her presence in moments of despair, as if Margaret Mary herself is nudging them toward the heart of Jesus. These stories, though unverified by ecclesiastical courts, form the heartbeat of her legacy, a reminder that saints aren't just historical figures, but active companions on our spiritual journeys. Canonization journey and universal veneration. Let's dive into the long, winding road to sainthood for Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, a journey as grueling and intricate as any epic quest. Born in 1647 in a small French village, Margaret Mary wasn't exactly on anyone's radar for celestial stardom. Her life, marked by personal suffering, think childhood illness, family loss, and a grueling entry into the Visitation convent at Paray-le-Monial wasn't the stuff of instant legend. Yet it was in the year of the quiet of that convent where the Sacred Heart revelations hit her like a thunderbolt. Visions of Christ entrusting her with a mission to spread devotion to his heart, burning with love and pierced by human in indifference. This wasn't just a personal call, it was a radical reframe of Catholic spirituality at a time when Jansenism's cold, rigid theology gripped much of Europe. The path to canonization, though, was no quick cutscene. After her death in 1690 at just 43, her story could have faded into obscurity, a footnote in a dusty convent ledger. But her writings, her relentless push for the Sacred Heart devotion, despite skepticism from her own religious superiors, kept the flame alive. It took grit from her early supporters, the Visitation nuns, and a few persistent Jesuit allies to document her visions and push her cause forward. By 1765, less than a century after her passing, the Church officially recognized her heroic virtue, declaring her venerable. Beatification followed in 1864, a slow burn of validation as her devotion spread like wildfire across continents, fueled by lay faithful and clergy alike who saw in the Sacred Heart a tangible beating symbol of divine mercy. Her canonization in 1920 by Pope Benedict XV was the final boss battle, if you will, a moment when the Church universally acknowledged her as a saint, not just for France, but for the whole world. They weren't just a bureaucratic stamp of approval, it was a recognition of how her message had reshaped Catholic piety. By then, Sacred Heart imagery was everywhere. Churches, homes, even battlefields of World War I, where soldiers clutched Sacred Heart badges for protection. Margaret Mary's influence had gone global, her once private revelations now a cornerstone of modern Catholic devotion, officially endorsed with feast days and papal encyclicals like Annum Sacrum by Leo XIII in 1899, consecrating the world to the Sacred Heart. What's striking here is the underdog arc. Margaret Mary wasn't a political heavyweight or a charismatic preacher. She was a cloistered nun, often doubted, sometimes dismissed, yet her quiet persistence, her unshakable trust in those divine encounters turned her into a spiritual powerhouse. Her universal veneration today, seen in countless parishes named for the Sacred Heart, in novenas prayed by millions, proves that faith, even from the margins, can rewrite the story of a church. We're a lasting call to the Sacred Heart. As we reflect on the life of Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, Apostle of the Sacred Heart, her message burns brighter than ever, a divine invitation to embrace Christ's love with unwavering trust. Her visions weren't just personal revelations, they were a wake-up call for the church, a reminder to dive deep into the boundless mercy of Jesus. At Journeys of Faith, we're inspired by her journey, one that mirrors the pilgrimages, both physical and spiritual, that we've championed since 1980. Her enduring message urges us to seek the Sacred Heart in our daily struggles, to find solace in his promises, just as countless Catholics have found renewal through the shrines and saints we celebrate. Whether you're exploring her story through our books, streaming content, or joining us on a pilgrimage to holy sites, St. Margaret Mary's life is a roadmap to deeper faith. Let her courage ignite your own journey. Dive into the resources at Journeys of Faith, where we guide you with trusted, authentic Catholic teachings to uncover the miracles waiting in your heart. Together, let's walk this path of faith inspired by the saints who've paved the way. Frequently asked questions about Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque. Who was Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque? Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque was a French nun of the Visitation order born in 1647 who became known as the Apostle of the Sacred Heart. Her life was marked by deep humility, intense suffering, and an unshakable devotion to Christ. Raised in a small village in Burgundy, she entered the convent at Paray-le-Monial at the age of 24, where she would later receive divine revelations that would transform Catholic spirituality. Her story, often overlooked in casual retellings, reveals a woman who faced skepticism and hardship, yet carried a message that resonates with millions today. What is the significance of the Sacred Heart in Catholic devotion? The Sacred Heart of Jesus represents Christ's boundless love and compassion for humanity, a devotion that became central to Catholic spirituality through Saint Margaret Mary's influence. It's more than just an image of a heart aflame. It's a call to personal transformation, a reminder of Jesus' sacrifice, and an invitation to love others as he does. At Journeys of Faith, we see this devotion as a cornerstone of faith, inspiring countless pilgrims to seek a deeper connection with Christ through prayer and Eucharistic adoration. When did Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque live? Saint Margaret Mary lived during the 17th century, born on July 22nd, 1647, and passing away on October 17th, 1690, at the age of 43. Her life unfolded in a time of religious tension in France, yet her quiet perseverance in a small convent would ignite a spiritual movement that spread far beyond her lifetime. Her era reminds us that even in turbulent times, God raises up saints to guide his people. How did Saint Margaret Mary become associated with the Sacred Heart? Her association with the Sacred Heart began with a series of profound visions of Jesus Christ starting in 1673. During these encounters, Jesus revealed his heart, burning with love and pierced by thorns, urging her to spread devotion to it as a remedy for humanity's coldness and sin. Though initially met with doubt by her superiors, her persistence and obedience eventually led to the formal recognition of this devotion. Her story, as we share at Journeys of Faith, is a testament to trusting in God's plan, even when the path is unclear. What visions did St. Margaret Mary experience? Between 1673 and 1675, St. Margaret Mary experienced several apparitions of Jesus, often during prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. In these visions, Christ showed her his Sacred Heart, wounded by humanity's ingratitude, and asked for reparation through prayer, sacrifice, and devotion. These weren't just mystical experiences, they were missions, charging her with a responsibility to awaken the church to his love. Her accounts, detailed and raw, continue to inspire those who explore her life with us on our pilgrimages. What messages did Jesus give to St. Margaret Mary? Jesus entrusted her with messages of love and reparation, emphasizing the need for humanity to return to him through devotion to his Sacred Heart. He spoke of his heart's longing for souls, the pain of being forgotten, and the promise of graces for those who honor him. Among the most powerful was the call for the First Friday devotions and the establishment of a feast in honor of the Sacred Heart, directives that have shaped Catholic practice for centuries. Where did St. Margaret Mary receive her apparitions? The apparitions took place in the humble convent of the Visitation Order in Paray-le-Monial, France, a small town that has since become a major pilgrimage site. It was in the stillness of the convent chapel, often before the tabernacle, that she encountered Christ. At Journeys of Faith, we've guided countless pilgrims to this sacred place where the echoes of her visions still linger, inviting all to deeper prayer and reflection. How has St. Margaret Mary's message impacted the church? Her message of the Sacred Heart has had a profound impact, leading to widespread devotion, the establishment of the Feast of the Sacred Heart, and the practice of First Friday devotions. Her revelations, initially met with resistance, were eventually embraced by the Church, influencing popes, theologians, and lay people alike. Her legacy is a reminder of how one person's faith can ignite a global movement, a theme we celebrate through our ministry's resources and events at Journeys of Faith. What are the First Friday devotions? The First Friday devotions, inspired by Christ's request to St. Margaret Mary, involve attending Mass and receiving Holy Communion on the first Friday of each month for 9 consecutive months. Jesus promised special graces, including final perseverance, to those who faithfully practice this devotion. It's a powerful way to honor the Sacred Heart, and at Journeys of Faith, we encourage families and individuals to incorporate this practice into their spiritual lives as a source of renewal. What is the Feast of the Sacred Heart? The Feast of the Sacred Heart is celebrated on the Friday after the octave of Corpus Christi, typically in June, as requested by Jesus in his revelations to Saint Margaret Mary. It's a day to honor Christ's love and mercy, often marked by special masses, processions, and personal acts of consecration to the Sacred Heart. This feast, deeply tied to her mission, remains a vibrant part of Catholic tradition, and we at Journeys of Faith invite all to explore its meaning through our media and pilgrimage experiences. Be sure to click the link in the description for the full article.
It's your journey, but we won't make the trip alone, 'cause we know God will lead us home.